Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Hope you're having a wonderful week wherever you are in the world. I hope your language learning is going well. I hope you've also been enjoying the last few episodes on the podcast. I've been experimenting a little bit, trying some new things. But I've been hearing a lot from you guys recently as well. So thank you for the emails. Thank you for the tweets. I really appreciate it. It's great for me to know that you've been benefiting from the podcast. It's what keeps me going. So thank you for that. Also, if you have been enjoying the podcast, you must make sure you fill out the big 2018 I Will Teach You a Language podcast survey. Oh, yes. Because whether you like things as they are with the podcast or whether you'd like them to totally change, either way, you have a vested interest, you see, because if you do nothing, it might either stay the same or totally change, and you will have no say in that. So if you haven't already done so, please go and answer a few questions for me in this survey, because this is what's going to decide the future. I'm going to sit down and go through all the answers and design the future of the podcast based on that. So please take a few minutes to do that. You can find the link at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/podcast survey. So definitely do that. You can pause the podcast right now and go and do that if you like. But please make sure to do that. It'll be up for another week or so you've got time still. All right then. Today we've got an email question from Alex. In the episode today, we're going to talk about how you might get a little bit more out of your lessons, for example, with an italki teacher. So how was that? Was that smooth enough? I'm not convinced it was. But anyway, I think you got the message. Okay, so Alex wrote to me and he said, "Hey Olly, how would you advise someone learning their first language to bounce back from a few bad lessons confidence-wise?" And he says, bad lessons on my part. "For some reason, I'm fine chatting away to myself at home in the language I'm learning and come up with potentially viable sentences, etc. But the second I hit the answer button on Skype, I freeze and go blank. It must be hard for my tutor too, but it's frustrating me no end because in English I get told off by friends and relatives for not shutting up. Any tips or advice would be great because everything I read paints italki as being the best thing I can do to speed up my progress, and I can see how it would, but I don't know how to get out of the rut." All right, then. So I'm sure this is a question that's going to resonate with many people listening. So hopefully we can be of some help here. All right, then. So I think it's important to say that ups and downs happen all the time for all kinds of reasons in all different areas of your learning. Okay, so like, for example, for me at the moment, I'm struggling with motivation, big time. Just one of those things. I have to draw deep on my reserves of motivational tricks to keep myself going and motivated. In this case, Alex, you had a few bad lessons, but it's important to view this in the long term and say that, okay, over the course of a few years, it's inevitable that you're going to have a few bad lessons, okay? But I'm going to make some assumptions here and drill down because I don't know what language you're learning. I don't know what stage you're at, but I can certainly talk from my experience with this. I actually started writing a book a few years back, which I didn't end up putting out because I don't know, I kind of felt like I was rushing it a little bit, and it was kind of a compilation of all different thoughts and mix of kind of blog posts and podcast episodes and chapters that I'd written myself and all these things. So I didn't end up putting it out, but the opening from the book was actually very relevant to this because I started off the book by telling a story, and it went something like this. As the Skype sound rang out across my living room, my palms started to sweat, my heartbeat started to elevate, and I realized I was petrified. It was something like that, right? Which seems to be exactly what you're saying here. There's something about this situation where you kind of you're about to start a lesson on Skype, and it seems to. But what seems to happen is that everything that you've been learning in the language is kind of suddenly distilled into that one moment where you have to perform, right? And that in itself isn't really ideal because you don't want to be put into pressured situations because language takes time to become common. When you get to a point in a language where you can just speak naturally and easily and freely, it's not because you've somehow memorized a bunch of stuff or you've learned a few tricks. It's because you've been using the language so much over such a long time that it just becomes normal for you. And so often when we're kind of put in these situations where like, right, okay, you have to perform now, it can be, not a very nice experience. Now, I think because of these experiences, like you're describing here, Alex, a lot of people react. A lot of people's reaction to that is kind of, oh, well, speaking's not for me, or, you shouldn't start speaking too early in a language or whatever. And I think that's a bit of a mistake, because what you're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater there. The fact that it's difficult and you get nervous and you kind of just get tongue-tied and find yourself lost for words and all these things. Yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable, but it's also a huge opportunity, because when you can figure out how to deal with that, that gets you through the kind of huge barrier that exists when you start speaking a new language. So what I've experienced personally with this is that the beginning of a conversation is often the hardest part, because once you get into the flow of things, you just forget that you're nervous in the first place. Nerves are things that we construct ourselves in our own minds. And when you're nervous, that can have a real kind of catastrophic effect on your ability to speak. Stress is something that in general we should avoid. So I think there are a couple of things here that I would advise, Alex. First of all, it's important that you can start a conversation confidently. When you're first, like you described this moment when the Skype box starts ringing and you better press that button and start the conversation. And a lot of that is because you're kind of thinking, okay, what am I going to say? What's the teacher going to say? Am I going to understand it? And you can get over a lot of these initial nerves by learning how to begin conversations. So one of the things that I do when I begin a new language is I get my teachers to tell me lots of different ways to begin a conversation, and I'll write them down. So that I can comfortably begin a conversation and get through the first sort of, 10, 20 seconds of that conversation without too much trouble, easily even, because I've just really worked hard at that point. And then you're kind of in a flow, and everything else that comes afterwards is much easier. So it seems like a small thing, but confidence-wise, it's huge. So one of the things that you could start to do right away is, if you're watching TV or movies or whatever, start to notice exactly what people say at the beginning of conversations. So write down the exact phrases that people say, not just the things that they say, but also how people reply, and start to kind of build up this little bank of conversation starters. So to take English as an example, when you first start, if you sit down with your teacher or whoever it is, it's difficult to come up with these examples on the spot, but you say, "Hi, how's it going? Good to see you. How have you been?" Maybe a comment about the weather, that kind of thing. Fine, thanks, not bad. And you? What's new? I don't know, I'm just kind of riffing on this, but there's all these different things that we say, and it's all very formulaic. You very rarely get the beginning of a conversation that's totally invented. So much. I was just writing this in an email earlier, actually. It's like so much of language is kind of is formulaic. We stick to scripts very, very much, especially in languages like Japanese, where so much of interaction between people is you're expected to stick to this script almost. So it can be quite easy and quick to learn how to begin these conversations. And you can ask your teacher about this as well. You can just say to him or her very honestly, "Look, I feel nervous at the beginning of conversations. Can we work on things to say at the beginning of conversations?" And you can tell your teacher the phrases you've written down. You could ask them for some suggestions. And then together, you could write out some sample dialogues for the beginning of conversations. So, "Hey, how are you?" "Fine. How are you doing? How's your girlfriend? How's your family?" Whatever. And write down some of, create these little dialogues for yourself and practice them between you and the teacher. So that way, what you're doing is you're kind of just dealing with it head on, and you're turning it into a learning point, so that you don't then have any need to be nervous when you're starting those Skype conversations. If anything, it becomes like a joke. You can just dive straight into that little skit between the two of you, and then that is going to have a huge impact on your confidence when you're starting conversations. Of course, in this case, it really helps to have the same teacher for a while. If you're always jumping from one teacher to the next, I mean, it's good in the sense that you get more exposure and more practice with different people, but in terms of confidence building, may not be such a good thing. So spend a bit of time really attacking this the thing that makes you nervous, and be honest with yourself and identify what that is. I might have missed the point a little bit with the beginning of a conversation. If that doesn't describe your situation, Alex, well, think about what does exactly. And if your reaction to that is, well, it's not just the beginning of the conversation, it's everything. I just freeze up completely and I can't talk at all. Well, in that case, I think it's important to say that if you've just started with italki, which it sounds like you have, don't expect to have easy, free-flowing conversations yet. Okay? This takes time. Depending on the language you're learning, it can take many months to get into the habit of doing that. All right. Now, some people would say, well, just don't speak. Just go off and read and listen and speak when you're ready. And that's absolutely fine. But I prefer to start speaking early on because it gets you to, it's extremely motivating. It gets you to start figuring out how to express yourself in the language. It gets you over these fears. So I think there's lots of reasons why it's a very good thing. But don't get disappointed if you can't just launch into a conversation like you can in English. That's going to take a long time to come. And so instead of just having kind of unstructured conversations, try to have some more specific structured activities. So in the past, I remember a couple of years ago when I was having Cantonese lessons, I think I even mentioned this on the podcast before, I was having lessons with this one girl who we just didn't get on. I don't know what it was, whether I made her nervous or our personalities just didn't match. I don't know what it was. Sometimes you have teachers like this, right? But she was very nice, and I could see she was really trying, but it just, like, free conversation just didn't work with her. And so we tried something very different. We tried a very structured activity, and it totally transformed, and the lessons kind of went from quite difficult and awkward to really productive. And what we did specifically in this case was she would choose pictures, photos that she found on Google, and she would have me describe them. So she would have me describe what's going on in the pictures, what the things are, what the people are doing. And what that did was this kind of removed the whole need for social pressure, making pleasant, nice, interesting conversations. And it created a very specific speaking task, which was good because it kind of challenged me to be accurate in the things that I was saying, but it also gave her a very clear and specific way to give feedback. She didn't have to be the kind of conversation partner anymore. She could just be the teacher in the purer sense, where she just says, no, that's right, or that's wrong, and you should say that instead. And it was actually really, really, really useful, and I got much more out of that than if I had just kind of continued insisting on chatting. Yeah, so there's lots of different structured activities like that. And it may be the case that by going down that route, and you could even use English in your lessons, don't feel you have to use 100% the target language. If it helps to kind of think of some activities together in English and then try them out, that's absolutely fine. Whatever kind of bridges the gap, gives you that step up, makes you feel more confident. I think it can be really damaging to have certain expectations. Expectations like, oh, I should be having free-flowing conversations from the start, and I should never use a word of English. No, forget that stuff. It doesn't matter. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, having more regular interactions with the teacher is best. All right? And this comes kind of back to the point of, it's not just you, Alex. I know it feels like it. In your message you said, bad lessons on my part. But the teacher bears some responsibility for this as well. And, because I've got a fair amount of teaching experience, I'm often very kind of conscious of the work that I'm imposing on the teacher in my own lessons, right? And so I kind of look for ways to make it, if I can tell that the teacher's not comfortable, I look for ways of making it a bit easier and reducing the pressure on the teacher a bit more, because often then the teacher can shine. And I know that's often, not necessarily an easy thing for the student to do, but it's worth thinking about, because, these interactions are not straightforward, and learning a language takes time and it takes grit, and you've got to keep it up. But I think, a combination of the ideas that I've given you here, like a kind of honest reflection on what exactly it is that's causing the nervousness and causing the freezing up, and then targeting that directly with the teacher by discussing it with them. Combination of that, plus reducing the burden of expectations that you're placing on yourself, and just trying to enjoy the process a bit more with more structured, traditional activities maybe that allow you to just cover some useful stuff in the lessons, should help you. All right, so I hope that's helpful. Do come and leave a comment on the show notes in the future when you've tried a few of these things out, and let me know what it was that you did that helped you to get over this, because you will get over it. It just requires a bit of experimentation. All right, so best of luck with that, Alex. If you would like to leave me a question, you can email me at ollie@iwillteachyoualanguage.com, or preferably by leaving a voice question, and you can do that by going to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. ASK. All right then, so at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And today, William Shakespeare is making his debut on the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, and he said, "Expectation is the root of all heartache." Expectation is the root of all heartache. Hopefully you can see the link there, and how Shakespeare was in fact talking about language lessons and italki when he was writing all that great stuff. Anyway, that's it for today. See you back in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.